And so, as the descendant of formerly enslaved people, it's really powerful to be invited to Sabbath and to rest.
This week we get God's top 10 list, or at least the 10 commandments. Sunday, October 8th. Is that where we are? I
Yep,
think so.
yep.
Narrative Lectionary brings us to a brand new book, Deuteronomy, but we're still in the same kind of stretch. Moses, Moses, Moses. And Adrienne, you are in the pulpit for this Deuteronomy narrative lectionary text.
Yeah.
We got a little bit of recap of God brings people out of Egypt. So we don't actually get the leaving Egypt story, but we just get this little reflection in this kind of portion. And then we get the Ten Commandments. And then we get Deuteronomy 6, one of the most well-known, or hopefully well-known parts for all of us. It's well-known in the Hebrew scriptures. Christians got to catch up still. The Shema, which is a Hebrew word. We'll talk about that in a minute. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, whatever's in this translation. What are you doing with this? How are you approaching this text and the sermon that you are assembling?
What I think is interesting about this one is that it does harken back a bit to what we discussed last week, this invitation to radical noticing. So Shema, to listen, to hear, is an invitation to pay attention,
Hmm.
to notice that God is our God. So I think that's one way in. The other thing that I love about the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, was a commentary I read a few years ago that talked about them not as commandments, but as these are who we are. This is what we do, like invitations to do these things. There's one in particular, one of the commandments in particular, the invitation to Sabbath. We are talking a lot about Sabbath here at Riverside, and just last week we had our first practicing Sabbath Sunday when we have worship and we all go to fellowship hour together. We break bread together and just hang out and just listen to stories and check on each other and get to know each other. There's really something powerful about the Decalogue, this one commentator said, as they are being delivered to people who were enslaved. And so, as the
Hmm.
descendant of formerly enslaved people, it's really powerful to be invited to Sabbath and to rest when there is no invitation to Sabbath or rest when you are an enslaved person.
Yep.
So, for God to say, this is who you are, as a creature of mine, you are someone who gets to break, who gets to rest, who gets to enjoy leisure. I think that is a really good gift. And I think it is a call not just to those who are descended from formerly enslaved people, but to all people, especially those of us caught up in capitalistic systems, systems that extract our labor, for us to notice why the pushback against rest. And I think it is that for many of us, something would have happened to us, to our people, if we didn't rest. There would be some consequence. It could be something as simple as not eating or not being able to pay your rent. And for my people, it could mean death or being sold away. And so to be people who have the gift of Sabbath, I think both calls us to make sure that all people have the gift of Sabbath, but I think it also invites us to take seriously this gift that we're being given by this God who created us and loves us.
Ooh. I love, I mean, I probably could have predicted that you would have landed on Sabbath, just given what's in the air at
Yeah.
Riverside, but in the world in general. But I think the thread the needle you just threaded there is poetic.
Hmm.
These are enslaved people coming out of Egypt, and it's the command to rest. And
Yeah.
then you talking about the history of formerly enslaved people. And I even think of it as like, what about the Jeff Bezoses of the world? They need to hear this sermon because they're the ones
Right.
creating unjust systems that don't allow people to rest. So
Yeah.
this is a word that we all need, whether you're being ground by this hustle culture or you're the one, building the machine and oiling it for your own wealth and find. We all need to recognize, what does it mean to create a culture of rest and Sabbath
Yeah,
so
a
we can
culture of
all
rest and Sabbath. Yeah, and I think we can point to Jeff Bezos, but I think we also have to, point those fingers back at ourselves.
Yep, yep, yep.
I know one
I
of
mean,
our
you're my
colleagues.
boss, so I didn't want to point them at you.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to have you point them at me because we probably all need to reflect on this. But, what are the things that we're doing? Like, are we sending emails at 3 and 4 in the morning that make the folks we supervise or the folks we serve among feel like they too have to send emails at 4 in the morning? And, I love that people put these little disclaimers on their emails. I'm sending this email at a time that works for me, but if this is not a time that works for you, it's like, but I still saw your email, right? It's still like landing in my email box at 4 in the morning. So I don't know. I think we need to figure some of that
Yeah.
out. But I think another point about these things, I think for people who were formerly enslaved, the commandment to honor your mother and father is another one. I remember this commentator, and I wish I could remember their name that they shared for people who were separated from their people, for people whose
Mm.
mothers and fathers they didn't
Ooh.
know. A commandment to honor people who are now in your life, who a generation or seven ago maybe were not in your life. I mean, there's a reason why, Black folks have play mamas and play aunties and everybody's our cousin. And that stems back to a time of enslavement when we didn't know where our people were or if someone was our sister or brother. And I think it's part of the reason why we jokingly call older women, whether they're our aunt or not, we call them auntie. We will call anybody Black our cousin or our sister or brother because that was the reality. It's kind of like a term of endearment now. But for God to say, honor those people, honor your family means you actually have family, which was not something that enslaved people could count on. So there's a real power in these commandments that I think we buck against in a way that it goes back to what I preached a couple of weeks ago. There's some demons there that we have to wrestle with if we're bucking against this. If the great God Almighty is saying, rest, children, spend time with your family, people, honor them, respect them, love on them, because this wasn't something you had back in Egypt, and I'm giving you this now.
All of the commandments. I'm now kind
Yeah?
of reading them through the frame of both, the story of Israelites enslaved in Egypt, which is a whole other thing of, is
Mm-hmm.
the historicity of that is a whole other rabbit trail, which is fun to talk about. But let's
Right.
just play with that narrative. And then, like you're saying, the reality of, formerly enslaved people, everything. Don't covet when you
Yeah.
are in this position where you don't have anything, where
Right.
you have no land, and now you have land. Okay,
Yes.
you have something. You don't become like the people who are just wanting. Don't steal. You had everything stolen from you. Don't become the oppressor. Don't become the slave owner. Don't become the pharaoh. Don't all of these kinds of ways in which we can revert to being the oppressor. Out in our liberation, we need to still recognize how do we create systems of liberation for all, including ourselves and the whole society we're a part of. That's oof,
Right.
oof.
And there's the hear, O Israel, because I think what God is also wanting us to hear is that I'm giving you this. I'm giving you a land and I'm giving
Yep.
you a people and I'm calling you mine. You don't need to covet. You don't need to steal because everything you need, I will give you. I have given you. You have freedom and you've got family and you've got me, and I'm not going to abandon you. It's like some really good stuff in there.
Well, I'm pretty sure you got a sermon in there somewhere,
Somewhere in
more than
there.
one. The heart.
Yeah,
This is going to be the whole sculpture, chipping away to what's not necessary to let the
right.
it's you got a whole lot to work with. So
Right. No, it's great talking it through with you because I think before we started talking, I was like, "Ah, I don't want to preach the Ten Commandments. What am I going to say about the Ten Commandments?" And then I was like, oh, yeah, I do remember someone said something that was actually really powerful. So there you go. So it's great. I've got
it's
the
the
sermon kind of
sneaky reason why we do this.
right.
It actually might be useful
It
for the
actually.
preacher working on their sermon, let alone those of you watching who might take some ideas and use them as well.
So you guys see how my staff helps me actually to do my job because, oh, they're like, that girl needs some help. I do. I need some help. Oh, I appreciate
Don't
it.
we all?
Don't we
Don't we
all?
all?
We do. We
Oh,
do.
well, as always, everybody, drop your ideas, your questions about this, where you would take it into a comment below. This narrative keeps on going.
Yeah.
Are we? Is this the end of Moses now? What do we get after this?
We're kind of cool. Oh, and I'm
Yeah,
not
yep.
sure.
We're going up on Ruth next. So this is it.
Oh, for Children's
We have
Sabbath next
yep.
week. The children are going to help us preach next week. It's going to be great. They're
Gonna
going
be
to help
good.
us
So
lead
we'll get
worship.
there. Let's stick with Moses for a hot minute, but
Yeah.
then coming up is going to be Ruth, where the narrative keeps going. It's going to be good. But leave your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, comments, snide remarks. We want it all. And then we'll be back again.
I don't know if we want the snide remarks.
Okay.
If
YouTube
you got
comments. You
snide
can't.
remarks, wrestle with your demons. Take that to therapy.
Oh, all right. We'll be back next week with Ruth and the children. See you then.
Yeah.